Today I want to look at plumbing up the depth, come back to Breach Pond. I know this swim quite well, it's not that deep, goes out to about 8 or 9 feet, but it's a complex pond. The depths vary anything from 2 or 3 feet deep in the shallow swims. Lots of swims are 15 or 16 feet deep when you go out a long way. And other swims, the bottom's just not level. When you go outwards, it goes off in a series of steps. And sometimes from one side to the other, it actually tilts. So you can have, say, 2 rod lengths out, 12 foot of water, and then it's going off even deeper at the same distance out from the bank, going off to 15 feet. Opposite me there's a swim that's like that, where it's only about 5 feet deep, 3 rod lengths out, and then you go right off to your left and it's going down into a big deep hole. So you can see that precision's needed on a water like this. Very different are the modern commercials. These have been dug out by hand to a set and very level depth, so you've got an absolutely flat bottom. A typical example is Todburn Manor fisheries, where they've got some match lakes there, and you've got around about 4.5 feet of water, and once you get a yard or so from the bank, it is pretty much flat as a board. So once you know the depths on there, you're away. What is apparent with waggler fishing is that it's more difficult to plumb the depth than with a pole. A pole makes life very, very easy. You can literally lower it down and try in and out, further out. You can see how much you can see when the plummet hits the bottom, because the line goes slack. Of course, that's limited in range. When we start to fish further out with a waggler, we get different problems. Casting a waggler set at, say, 12 or 13 feet with a heavy plummet, we've ended up with 2 heavy weights. So we've got the bulk shot around the waggler and we've got the plummet itself, and the 2 can start to cartwheel. And there is a way around that, and the way around that is to just pinch a small shot, a BB or a treble A shot, on the line or on the hook, either on the line immediately above the hook or on the hook itself. And that will cast well, because the bulk of the shot that around the waggler will then do the casting, so it just pulls it all the way out with it. One advantage with a shot is that you can also, if you want to find out, say you want to fish a foot over depth, you can pinch a BB shot a foot from the hook and plumb to that, as opposed to plumb to the hook. So you're not fishing dead depth, you're fishing with it at an angle there and that extra foot. And that's a clever way to do it. To make life easier today, what I've done here, I've set up a waggler and I've put it on some very fine silicone pole rubber, the sort that you would use on very small pole floats. And that means I can move the whole thing up and down the line. As long as it's wet, it will move nicely, and that doesn't damage the line. Otherwise, when you move your shot, you've got to keep opening them up and pinching them on. There's always a danger of damaging the line. And the fiddly thing about this is only £2 Maxima, but threading that bit of fine tube when you're getting a little bit old, I won't say senile, senior, is not the easiest thing. This one did thread up nice and easily. And let's see if we can have a go at plumbing the depth here. So I've already set the float, I've set it right, and I've got at the moment just a little clip-on plummet, which hopefully is secure, very easy to use. There are other sorts of plummets. There's the ones with a cork insert in the base, where you thread the line through an eye, just hook into the cork. They're very secure, and like I say, a BB shot. So let's see if we can find the depth close in. I'm going to try and pick this up. Just had a shot fall off now, which is not very good. That is perhaps the disadvantage of the silicone rubber, is getting the shot to stay on there. You can pinch them very much more tightly. Let's see if we can pick this float up. Let's try plumbing the depth. That's disappeared. That's coming back up. So that depth is changing just in a foot. It's changing probably 6 inches. So it's a steep slope, and that's common on this pond until you go right out into the middle. Just increase the depth by a foot. Casting out a bit further, see if we can pick that float up. So we found the depth there fairly close in, and this is a job that can take time. We would expect to go to each side as we do it and try different things. About 40 years ago, I went with a friend to watch a national championship that was in Somerset. It's on the King Sedgemoor and the Huntsbill, and we went along the King Sedgemoor just before the start. And back in those days in the national, you couldn't break the surface of the water until the whistle went. You couldn't put your keep net in. You could take water to mix ground bait, but you couldn't plumb the depth, couldn't test your float. You had to wait for that starting whistle. And the angler we chose to watch was Kevin Ashurst. And the King Sedgemoor, from what I remember, was sort of 6 to 8 feet deep, quite a wide drain, big drain. And it was quite fascinating to watch Kevin really taking his time plumbing the depth right across the swim, fairly heavy plummet, until he was satisfied. He knew where the ledges were, where it shelved off, and where he was going to fish, and that he was happy with the float was behaving how he wanted. And that took him a full 10 minutes at the start of the match. In the meantime, other anglers that we could see were fishing right across the drain, catching odd rudd on the drop, and they were at it like a bull at a gate, really. They didn't mess around. They were just fishing away with very, very little preparation at the start of the match. As long as they were happy the float was right and they started fishing. They might have done a cursory bit of plumbing. When Kevin was happy that he knew exactly what he was going to do, he put some ground bait in, probably about halfway across, and he started to fish. We didn't watch the whole match. We watched other people that day. I don't remember much of it. But at the end of the match, he had around about 11 pounds, which was a very good weight on the King Sedgemoor drain, roach and skimmers. And it was obvious that his slow approach paid off by the end of the match, that getting to know what the contours of the swim were like, where he might find the fish, where the shelf was. Because often fish are at the bottom of a shelf. If you think about it, the feed that comes down onto the shelf will tend to get washed down to the bottom of the shelf, and the fish know this instinctively. They look for places where food naturally collects. So at the bottom of a shelf, this is where they'll find the food. And also on the slope, the fish can come along fairly horizontal as opposed to having to go right down vertical to pick the bait up. So they'll feed in a way that they find easiest. So that's what they tend to do. So plumbing up is an important job. On this pond, as I say, I've fished it. This is the 51st year I've been fishing it. When I first fished it, I used to fish it just 4 foot deep regardless of swim and catch a little stunted roach. And eventually would go down on the bottom and catch gudgeon, tiny gudgeon. All of these fish were about this big. But as time's gone on, we got to know the swims properly, and we've even rowed a boat across it with a 50-foot tape measure with a 2-pound lead on it, bumping the bottom all the way across. And I've got charts that show the depths, and we found some surprising things. For instance, the bottom going out, going down a foot across for about 3 or 4 yards, and then up a foot, and then flat after that. And what that represented was an old cart track going along the base of the pond from when it was dug out. There may have even been a railway line down there, a narrow gauge railway line that was pulled up with a winch and pulleys. And there are other bits where it almost vertical faces where the clay's being cut. And if you ever see a clay pit that's being dug out, you'll see the contours like this. They are deep pits, steep sides. As gravel pits tend to be a bit more shallow, often with islands that are left where the gravel's poor quality. They may leave an island or two. Sometimes gravel pits change a great deal. A couple of the pits at Ringwood, the Roach pit and Spinnaker Lake, were deepened back in the mid-80s. Back before that, they were sort of 5 to 8 feet deep. And Wessex Water came along and they drained them down and deepened them up to anything up to about 16 foot to make them into auxiliary water reservoirs. So they're much deeper. And there you start off quite shallow, and then it just drops off to sort of 12 foot. And again, you've got to watch what that depth's doing and understand it. There's still islands there and shallower bits. Hope I've told you something about plumbing up. I'll try and make sense of all this. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.